And we're live with another review of Homicide: Life on the Street. And the reason why I've just amused myself, folks, is that I've come to realise that really these these hangouts are effectively sponsored by Kersey Temperament Theory, aren't they, Jeff? Because that's the running theme. That's what we sort of use to look at this program. We use this. We use Kersey Temperament Theory. So today is a good episode, especially for Jeff and his sort of like his reaction to it. And I added like a Jeff-like reaction to this. My feeling side came out with this episode. So over to Jeff for a feelers episode.
Man, that's a lot of intro. Okay.
Yeah. Waffle.
Yeah, this is season 6, episode 17, which was titled Abduction. It's written by Julie Martin and Anya Epstein and directed by Kenneth Fink, and originally aired March 27th, 1998 on NBC. And as I said last week, after we had an episode that was, had a lot of different stories going on and different sort of things continuing from previous episodes, this is one that could almost be a standalone episode, in that the whole episode follows one story, and you don't really have pretty much anything from any of the previous storylines coming into this one, in terms of you don't have anything else about the Mahoney stuff. You don't really have anything. I guess the only thing was the brief conversation Pemberton and Bayless had about Bayless wanting a child or wanting to get married.
Yeah.
And Pemberton saying something about, so your experimental phase is over. I guess that's really the only major reference to any previous storyline that we had in the whole thing. So this would be, if you weren't going to start somebody at the beginning of Homicide, if you were just going to give them an example of a Homicide episode that was kind of not like a typical Homicide episode, you could show them this one, and they wouldn't be confused, because it's pretty self-explanatory. But anyway, let's see what David B226 Morris had to say about it. I can tell from his score that he didn't really like it that much, but let's find out what he said. Okay. As we learned in passing in the previous episode, in addition to working murders, the Homicide Unit of Baltimore also investigates extortion, bribery, and kidnapping. We have never seen them working one of these cases, but Abduction shows how the detectives work in kidnapping when a 4-year-old named Paul Marshall disappears. And what was that? His name, Paul? Are you still there, Ben?
Yes, I'm here. I don't think the kid was called Paul.
Yeah, I think you got the name wrong.
Maybe Sean Marshall or something.
Sean, yeah, that's what it was. I knew that was wrong. But
it's Falzone's Paul.
Yeah, I think he got Falzone and Marshall mixed up. Anyway, okay, Sean Marshall disappears in front of his mother at a merry-go-round near the Inner Harbor. This episode takes place before these kinds of cases were supervised by the FBI, pre-Amber Alert, so the cases run like a red ball. And at the forefront of this episode, like so many in Season 6, Detective Falzone is at the forefront. The entire squad is called in to work the crime, and we see the same kind of pressure that the detectives go through even when there is no body. If anything, the stress is greater because there is a chance that the victim is alive, and the odds get lower every additional hour the child is missing. It is also interesting to see how the unit behaves in regard to the media. Every time there is a homicide involving a child, the detectives think that the media's presence hinders the chances of a successful result. When the child is abducted, they rely on the mass media to help them in their efforts to search for the victim. Indeed, this episode adds a second level by having the detectives use the host of a weekly reality show, This Week's Wanted, to help them look for Sean Marshall. The host of the show even suggests bringing in a hypnotist to work with a witness, a 7-year-old who was also on the merry-go-round, in order to get a lead and are physically in the room when the child is rescued. Obviously, the show is based on America's Most Wanted, complete with the host modeled after John Walsh. Both figures suffered the loss of a child several years ago, and we know that these shows are helpful in aiding the capture of felons and recovering missing children. Yet despite this, it seems to go against the realism we have come to expect of Homicide that the detectives and the brass are willing to go along with this, and it adds a certain disconnect. Because the episode is so focused on the hunt for Sean Marshall, a lot of the character-related stories that we have come to expect from the show also get lost in the shuffle. It is true that we see the focus on Falzone's character and his own stress when a child around the same age as his son has been taken. In that way, he has a mixture of concern and anger involving involved in capturing the perpetrator and making sure that his son is safe. He also shares a certain amount of empathy with the abductee's father, considering the custody arrangements that they both have. Yet this is all too familiar territory that we have been exploring over the past several episodes, and it seems a tad repetitive. We also don't get a great deal of focus on any of the other detectives and their opinions. The episode shows Ballard and Bayless both have desires to have children, yet gives no attention to Pembleton and Gardy, who actually have kids and might have this nightmare. Much in the same way that many of the murders on Homicide are actually committed by the most likely person, the investigation kidnapping unfolds the same way. There are false leads as the detectives root out the answers, and the kidnapping turns out to have been committed by a person the evidence leads to. In this case, to a deluded woman who believes Sean Marshall would be better off in her care than in his parents. This sounds real, yet it also has a very stagey quality to it. It just seems very false. Perhaps the best summary about Abduction comes when the case is closed and the people at This Week's Wanted decide to air the Marshall story because of its positive resolution. Falzone jokes that the reason they show life-affirming stories sometimes for better ratings, one cannot help but wonder if Abduction was written and produced for those exact same reasons, to give Homicide a more life-affirming story. Well, it doesn't quite work, and after 4 straight episodes which have not centered on murders, we're all but looking forward to a Stone whodunit. Fortunately, this being Baltimore, we're finally going to get some. My score, 6.3. So that's what he says. Ben, how about you?
Well, well, I quite liked it. And I did, and what happened at the end was Andrews, the guy who's like based on Walsh, sometimes we like to do happy endings, and then Falzone says, for the ratings, and Andrews says, for the ratings. And that has a good extra, pathos to it, given that, they both know, well, maybe, but, like I said, he lost his own son, the Andrews character. What is the realism, do you think, of the Homicide unit doing of like other units when there is like a high profile abduction?
Well, apparently at that time it was 100% true. That was one of the things David Simon mentioned in his book. So this was realistic at the time. Like Mr. Morris said that later on they involved the FBI. But at this time, that was the way they handled it, at least in Baltimore.
I think this bit was good, and particularly for getting the audience on like Falzone's side. Like when you have the pedophile's reaction to the photograph of the kid, and then Falzone sees the reaction. I think it's particularly tough when an actor plays this kind of part because they can do it so well. But that they stick in the audience's mind, and then it's then hard for them to play other parts.
Yeah.
So, because it's hard to shake that image.
Without spoiling anything, in the very next episode, we're going to see that in reverse, because we're going to see an actor that is known for a very kid-friendly part playing a non-kid-friendly character.
Well, I think it can work in reverse. But there was a children's television series called Grange Hill, and there was a young actor that played a racist character in that show, and people thought he was like racist in real life. And so some people can do it so well that it's just like even when the audience sees that character as somebody else, they just have an instinctive reaction to the person's face, and they get typecast.
And now, one thing that has happened also is characters that have been on like kid shows and things, or their image is very squeaky clean or whatever.
Yeah.
The first opportunity they have to play a sinister character, they usually do that because they want to demonstrate that they have range and can play that kind of part too.
Now, to me, this actor looks like a not quite as good actor. The guy who co-wrote Pulp Fiction, Tarantino. What was I going to say? I was going to say something about... Oh, yes. A slight digression into Blake 7, but only a slight one. And that is, the guy that played the first Travis, Stephen Greif, he actually said that he should have been typecast. He said that that would have been better for his career, because his opinion was that because he wanted to play lots of different characters all the while, that casting directors didn't know where to put him and what to look for, because he never sort of like established himself as a certain type of character. Because casting directors, maybe some of the lazier ones, will think, oh, let's go to him because they know that he can do that kind of character.
Yeah, I remember we talked about that before. Some people sort of have been successful as character actors being that one particular type of character and whatever.
Yeah,
they've needed, and it does give them somewhat steady work at least.
And you know, most actors and actresses, I'd say about even 99% of them are not in full-time employment. Most of them are doing something else. And and David Jason, lots of different things as well, but we won't talk about him. An interesting thing that was mentioned there, an interesting side issue that came up with a comment from David B226 Morris, is he mentioned FBI. So did you say it was changed to a federal matter, child abduction?
Yeah, I don't know the exact statute as to at what point it becomes an FBI thing, but what he mentioned, the Amber Alert,
yeah,
you know, is that as soon as that's declared, then technically it is like considered a federal investigation, though you still have obviously cooperation with local authorities.
You see, what I was wondering, Jeff, is I wondered if, because you are in certain areas you are a well-read person, in certain areas of local politics. I just wondered if there was ever any pushback in Texas from like, hey, from a constitutional point of view of, hey, well, thanks for the help, but you know, this should be a local matter.
I don't know. That the Amber Alert comes from was actually from Texas, as I recall. So in a sense, it originated from Texas, but I don't know how all that developed. I really don't have much knowledge of that.
Right.
But I guess the idea behind it is that if a child's abducted, then they want every resource available. And because of the way that America has gone in the last several decades, there is more power in the federal government now than ever before. So they figure, well, if they have the resources, we might as well use them.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they figure there's not much that's more important than if there's a chance to save a child's life before, you know, as they mentioned in the episode, before they end up, you know, just showing up as a body somewhere.
Yeah. And this goes to my next point with you. It's like, even though you are a constitutionalist, you are a father first. And so how do you think this episode would have affected you if you'd watched it, if you like had your son who was like a similar age?
Yeah, obviously, you know, there was a gap. When I first saw this, I wasn't a father yet, and then when I saw it again, you know, Morgan was quite a bit older than that, but it doesn't mean that I can't still understand the emotions of it, for sure. Because anytime there's, you know, when they did the story about the kid who got shot in the mall, you know, in a doll's eyes, you know, anything that connects that way where a child's been hurt or, you know, abused in some way or something's happened to them, it's obviously something I think any parent is going to relate to, that fear and that feeling. Even if they haven't actually had something like that happen to their kid, they're going to understand what it could feel like.
I had a Jeff moment in this as well with this storyline. And I thought this actress was well cast for the role, and I thought her reaction, like putting the hand over the face, was sort of like it suited her character in that she seems somebody who's like a little bit reserved, and so she'd want to like hide her horror behind her hand like that.
Yeah.
And so I thought that that was quite a good. I thought that was in keeping with the character. And this type of role does show that usually in television programs, that actresses are called on to do more acting than actors, to show more. I mean, her role was harder to play than that of the husband, in my opinion.
Yes and no. I mean, she was on screen more than he was, but I think his part, you know, could be difficult as well because he's trying to play somebody who is, you know, demonstrating all those same kind of feelings about the disappearance of their son, but at the same time, I think very realistically, he's trying not to show his emotions and kind of, you know, keep himself composed for the sake of
Yeah.
his ex-wife and for everybody else, you know, that he's trying to be the strong one, quote unquote, and, you know, it's obviously tough to portray that also because you kind of have to say, well, how much, you know, do I do of that? You know, how much does maybe the voice crack a little bit when I'm trying to say something that's, you know, when all this is kind of hitting me for what's happening. And as, you know, as a member of the audience, you know, I guess there were 3 moments where I sort of, where the, you know, things kind of hit me. And the first, you know, the very first part that you showed where, you know, the kid first disappears because you've got that kind of the shock and horror moment. And then the second one was when they have the parents on the TV show. And there was that great juxtaposition. Again, Homicide is great at this, where you show them doing the appeal to the audience, but instead of making this sort of a quick cut montage thing like some shows would have done, you show that it's basically them alone on the set, and you've got the one guy who's kind of trying to direct them without saying anything. And they when they go off the air, and he gives them like the cut symbol, but then they keep talking, and there's just kind of this feeling of like total isolation, like, okay, we're done with you, and then there's nobody, you know. So it has this. They leave it lingering on that moment, which I thought was great.
And also that they slightly messed it up.
Right, they're not talking to the right camera.
Yeah.
You know, so that stuff is, those little details again is what, you know, some of the things that separate Homicide from shows that aren't as good because they would make things into more of a slick production number. And then the third moment, of course, is the reunion. You know, that's the moment where I, you know, really can relate, and that's the case even with something that the specifics may not have ever happened to me. Whenever they've shown, I'm a sucker for all of those, you know, montages of like soldiers coming back and reuniting with their families and things like that, and all those kind of. Most of all, it happens, you know, in a case of a child because it's like, you know, that's the one that hits me the most. So
how about
the scene where they get him back is just like one of those moments where, you know, I disagree with Morris because he talks about, he seems down on it because of doing a life-affirming story, and that's not supposed to be like Homicide. It is different than a typical Homicide, but after having so many episodes where there's no good news, you know, in this one, we finally get to have a scene like that. So, you know, I think that was good.
Yeah, and also like the previous episode was pretty dark in terms of like showing like, you know, these people in a lot of pain, like people in so much pain that they want to die, and like bringing up like a dark issue for people because a lot of people have elderly relatives and some in pain. But I also felt that this episode was like the payoff for Falzone and having to put up with all that storyline with him and his kid.
Yeah, and you saw, you know, a couple of good scenes between him and his ex-wife too. You know, it's like because you had that moment where it's like, you know, they're already kind of had in the previous episodes, and I know that's what Morris was talking about. He thinks it was sort of a rehash because it was like she sort of softened up to him in terms of seeing the compassion he had for their son. But I liked the way they did it in this episode, because it's sort of like she's saying at first, there's no way I can keep him out of school, and you're overreacting and stuff, but then it kind of hits her that, she can do this thing not just for their son's sake, but also to sort of accommodate Falzone, because it's like, I can do this one thing. And then I also like, again, the realism of the whole time they're talking about it, and the kid is making a mess on the table by putting meatballs on the so all of that was well done, again, in my view.
There we go. Yeah, just like, because the audience will identify with Falzone. Yeah, making Falzone the primary on the case. And because the audience is going to want Falzone to punch him when he sees that reaction of the convicted paedophile that's been released and he's just seen the picture of the kid. And the audience is going to want him to punch him. And then when he does confront him, so it's like, and then again, it was built up before by was it an episode or so before where G said the toughest cases are when it's an officer that's been killed or a kid.
Yeah, that was the previous one. The same Mercy.
Yeah.
Because it was Falzone and Stivers that had that case.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a part of me that likes to, be experimental and see like other sides of things. So this kind of would have been one of those things where it would have been interesting to like do the same story with different people as the primary and see how it would have been handled differently. Like, you think the opposite, extreme almost, and say, okay, put Munch as the primary on this case and see how it would have been different in terms of the way he handled those things.
Well, I think
some
that
of it would have been the same, because some things G, pulled rank and said, we're going to do this whether you like it or not, like the hypnotist and the the TV show. So there were things that he kind of like didn't really have a choice on anyway.
Yeah, and Richard Belzer became a better actor than, say, in season 1, where he became a little bit of a better actor.
Yeah, I think
I mean, I do think that one, I mean, the one where they had Richard Belzer and they had all those flashbacks to him as a kid, that could have been so much better.
Yeah.
That could have been like a top 5 episode.
But I guess about this one, I would say that it's well done for what it is. I don't mind a change of pace episodes. I do overall prefer the ones that have different stories going and more different perspectives. But I do occasionally like one like this that sort of focuses in one way. And of course, my favorite episode they ever did, Bop Gun, really was mainly about one story, but it did cover a lot of different elements and different perspectives of that story, including more of the victim's family's perspective that we hadn't really seen up to that point. But so I can enjoy it either way. I would like the series overall less if more episodes were like this, but I don't mind it being sort of a change of pace episode, and because it's well done for what it is, even though it's missing some of the elements that I like best about Homicide, so I can't like give it a 10 or anything, but I can still enjoy it for what it is and think they did a good job of how they put it together.
Yeah, and I think that we've mentioned this before with like previous episodes. Why do you prefer like episodes with like lots of different storylines in? Yeah,
I don't know. I just think it makes it more interesting to have different elements going on at the same time. It makes it feel more realistic, for one thing, because it's like, people's lives are going on. It's like it stops short of the ultimate realism, which David Simon wanted to do, but I understand why they didn't want to do, because it ultimately becomes boring for the audience. But he
Yeah.
wanted to do, like, you know, really just showing the Homicide Squad, like, how, you know, on a day-to-day basis things go throughout the day, as opposed to following one case or even multiple cases across several days. It's just making it more of a, here's all the things that came up this day. And they have done, you know, they did a few episodes that were closer to that, and even Law and Order did a couple episodes like that where they kind of focus. And so, you know, if you made the entire series that, would you retain an audience? Maybe not, at least not a very big one. But I understand how, you know, that ultimately is something I think would be fun to watch, to me, because it's that connection, you know, with people. And I think that, you know, that's, you know, one of my number one things is that the connecting with people, getting to know people, is a thing that I like to do. And if you can do that in a way, even with fictional characters, where you sort of have the elements of, here's all of these things that go into what makes up these people, then I enjoy those aspects. So when you have different stories going on at the same time, it sort of reminds the audience that this is not a vacuum where this is taking place, where you have this, like, blinders on, these people are focusing on this one case over a period of days, weeks, months, whatever it takes, and that nothing else happens during that time. Because there are shows that obviously it's presented that way. Law and Order may be the most extreme example, because they follow, you know, the one case all the way from the initial discovery of a body all the way through the court proceedings. So, you know, in real life, obviously that can take, you know, a year or more for that entire process to happen. So I kind of like the opposite approach better, where it's more like day by day, here's the things that are happening that all relate to things, and you have continuing stories that happen over a long time, like, you know, like a trial could last a really long time.
Yeah.
And things like that could be there. Meanwhile, life goes on. It's like something, you know, where you're a police detective, you know, during a day, you may be called upon to sit at your desk doing paperwork for hours, or you might have to go testify in court, or you may actually have to chase down a suspect, or you may have to get lectured by the boss for a while, or, you know, there's all these things that can sort of happen in the course of a day in that job. And I like showing different elements of that happening at the same time.
Right. So I've written down a question here, and you pretty much answered it through that, but I think it's related to, like, drill down on why you are. So do you think that the sort of, like, your root, sort of like realism being, like, such a big criterion for you, and that the root of that is so that you can connect to the characters? Everything comes back to that.
Yeah, I think so. It gives me a feeling of, like, this is something I can. I always hesitate to say take seriously, because it makes it sound like I'm, you know, requiring, you know, every entertainment thing to be like 100% like reality, and I don't. Obviously, I can enjoy plenty of things that are not, you know, much to do with reality, but I think I tend to enjoy stuff that's more grounded in reality, even if it, you know, adds Hollywood aspects to it, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, in general, that's, I think I enjoy I mean, that, to me, because that's my basis in life, you know, it's like, if I don't have connections with people, then why bother, is kind of my feeling. So entertainment, I feel like the same way. And somewhat that comes up sometimes in watching some of the shows that I watch, that, you know, Morgan hears it, but he's not really wanting to watch it, and he kind of bashes the shows I watch, like soap operas and stuff.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, I can simultaneously agree with him on some aspects about certain bad writing, and I can say, yeah, that writing's not great, I would have done it better, but it doesn't make me want to entirely stop watching the show, because I still am interested in the characters. I want to follow what they're, you know, what the characters are doing, and what. So there is a connection there, and in some cases, acting as well. I can think there's actors that, even if the material they've been given is bad, I almost admire them more because of what they're making with the bad material.
Oh yeah, I mean, someone could be, like, so good where it's like you will just watch it. Like someone like Edward James Olmos. It's like, I'm going to watch him. He would play a really bad part. And I suggest people watch like Miami Vice because he plays a character in that.
Yeah, and I think every time you bring that up, I usually bring up Dustin Hoffman and
Oh yeah, big thumbs up to him.
The movie Sphere, which is, you know, one of those movies that on paper is really not that good, but because it's carried mostly by him and Samuel L. Jackson's acting performances, because they're both really good in that movie, and they kind of make it compelling despite the not so great script.
So what we can bring in now is, because we can bring in a little bit of typology in that. So you've got your connection with people, and you know, I know you like to use functions as a supplement to Kersey temperament theory, and so usually that gets put in the FI box, the connection with people. But also Morgan, who fits the ESFP, sorry, the ESTP pattern, even he has that connection thing with homicide. So, like I said, like I think you suggest because he initially connected with the Kellerman character.
Yeah, which is why he doesn't like stuff happens in the last couple of seasons, because he doesn't like what happened to the character. So
right. So you got a case here, folks, where you've got an ESTP that is not known for doing the FI thing. So all types at some level want to connect. There is that human thing of empathy, of like finding a person that is like you, that thinks like you, and there is that connection there. But even for somebody,
I think most people do kind of want relatable characters to some extent. I can even remember reading on some type group or another, I don't remember which, an INTJ person lamenting the fact that most INTJs in popular fictional stuff were always portrayed as either like complete nerd types, like obsessive people that, you know, totally like antisocial and stuff like that, or they're portrayed as like criminal mastermind type characters, like, you know, as opposed to there ever being sort of, you know, more kind of like normal people that can get along in society and aren't like some sort of odd creature, I guess you could say.
well, it's they do have that. They still do have that aspect to them, and it's you have to sort of like show. I think maybe you can do like a developed INTJ.
Yeah, I mean,
that you can do that in writing. You have to sort of show relationships and people that they're closer to bring out these different sides to them.
Yeah, I think you can show more, you know, when you're talking about the skills of an INTJ, for instance, the things that they're competent at, that they're good at, why they might be a specialist in a particular field, but not have them be like portrayed as such a weirdo or like some kind of you know, criminal wants to take over the world type of character. You know.
Yeah, I mean, they had a little bit of that of like, I mean, how NTJ Jeff was Kurt Avon in Break 7.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of an example of a character that started out seeming more portrayed more as a competent person with a particular specialty, and then they make him a little bit loonier as it went on.
Well, I think part of that also was the actor sort of like, because the actor is known as taking the mickey a little bit. Is a little bit. It's more of his. You talked about the Captain Kirk aspect coming through. It's like just his natural
and
personality.
As we've talked about before, that's the kind of thing where, as you know, as director / producer, you've got kind of rein that in. If you have a character that, you know, the actor wants to do that, you got to be like, okay, you got to save that for certain times and not have him go where he becomes a parody of himself. Yep.
And also, because Jeff and I like Doctor Who, the extremely good. I suggest people buy the Robots of Death. Not only is it good as in itself, it has a fantastic commentary on it with Chris Boucher and Philip Hinchcliffe, where Philip Hinchcliffe mentioned that he had a lot easier. he was lucky that he got Tom Baker early on, and he found him easier to control because he got him early on. And he said he treated him like a wild horse that you had to like very much try to like be on top of and keep under reins.
Yeah, and then a lot of people, that worked with Robin Williams described him similarly in terms of, Robin Williams is very like kind of manic as a person, all over the place, wants to constantly, kind of take things in weird directions. And if you're directing him, they kind of had to, times to say, okay, Robin, you got to focus and do this. And crazy.
Well, I would be cut. Well, I would be okay directing him because I like what he did, and it's just trying to work out where the guidelines are. And plus, he was such a flipping good actor anyway. Even doing the dramatic stuff, he was brilliant in Good Will Hunting. And I recommend to people, and I especially recommend to parents, show your children Mork and Mindy, because the Mork character is so childlike about learning how to be in the world and learning these social rules. And so it's good for NPs to watch. I reckon that, Mork and Mindy.
Plus Mindy's cute too.
Yeah.
One of my first childhood crushes. Anyway, so do you have anything else to say about this Homicide episode?
I'm glad it had a happy ending. I thought she was well cast. They went for
Mother.
Yeah, they didn't just deliberately go for the glamorous mother or something like that. They went for the realistic looking mother, someone who's a bit more introverted. As I said with the hand, I thought that was a good choice. I would give it about 8 out of 10. It wasn't quite as good as the previous one before, and the one before I thought was particularly good because of the fact that I always like it when Frank meets his equal in the box, and in that previous episode he met his equal in the box.
Right. I agree. I give it an 8 as well. Like I said, it's good for what it is. It's not the pinnacle of Homicide, but it's compelling, keeps your interest the whole time, and has various elements that make it well done, including even mentioning some of those often forgot about detectives of the Nighttime Squad that they throw their names out from time to time, like Shabazz and Stepopoulos. They never get any lines.
There should be someone called Alfonso, just because it's a funny name. I mean, if there is will there ever be a Hurricane Alfonso? I mean, maybe it's just too silly a name.
Man, dissing on Alfonso.
Yeah, but
Alfonso Ribeiro is going to come hurt you.
Oh no! What is he? Is he a big guy? Should I be worried?
No, he's not that big. You ever saw either Silver Spoons or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
I saw Fresh Prince of Bel-Air,
okay, yeah,
but not Silver Spoons.
He's Carlton.
Oh, he was fantastic.
Yeah,
as Carlton. He was fantastic as Carlton. Now, just a slight digression, folks. I would just say that I believe Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, in terms of its design, solved the problem that the Cosby Show had, where people thought that the Cosby Show was good in that it showed an aspirational black family that was like, but it didn't have the aspect of showing what it was like in the ghetto. Whereas you had that combination in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where you had the rich Uncle Phil, but you also had Smith's character from the poor area, and so you had that you had both of those sides of the black experience. And so, in terms of the way they dealt with issues, but not too heavy-handedly. I thought that was very good, and it was funny as well.
All
yes,
right.
Carlton.
Well, there you get that endorsement of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in the Homicide review. So, all right. So we both gave it an 8 for an average of 8. And next week, I'll return to a little bit more traditional Homicide with some different stories and some elements of previous ones that come up. And as I mentioned earlier, you get a guest starring role by someone best known as a kid show guy, not playing that part in this. And also, one of my favorite Pemberton Bayliss scenes ever is in this episode. So it's an interesting one called Full Court Press. So join us next week for that.
I'm just leaving you with the idea, folks. Wouldn't it have been brilliant if that actor who played Carlton played a detective in Homicide in the same fashion? That would be fantastic. Right. Bye-bye, folks.
All right, bye.